Hi there, my name is Kateryna Babkina and I'm a writer from Ukraine, and I'm happy here today to talk about myself, just as everyone is normally happy to talk about themselves. And also I'm happy today to talk to you about Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian literature, because Ukrainian literature is cool and great, even though you don't know much about it yet. But today I'll drop eventually some Slavic names, which will sound for you not easy to remember. But don't you doubt, I have given a list of the names and the names of the books to Mr. Norris. So please check it out, read it online, try to find the book in the library or in your favorite local bookstore, buy an ebook somewhere on the internet, and please get familiar with Ukrainian literature. I'm 36 years old, and by now I have written and published 12 books, which are one novel, one more novel in short stories, 4 poetry collections, 2 fiction and 1 non-fiction book for children, 2 short stories collections, and 1 more non-fiction for grown-ups on writing, motivation and inspiration. And just in case you were counting, that makes exactly 12 books. And I have also written 2 books co-authoring other cool Ukrainian authors, and some stories that were published in magazines and anthologies, and also some theater plays and some film scripts, movie scripts. And my books were published in translation in, I have obviously some notes here to not to forget something important I'm gonna tell you. So my books were translated and published in Austria, in Germany, in Israel, in Poland, in Serbia, in Greece, and in Vietnam. And some of my stories and poems were also translated into Chinese, Romanian, English, of course, Swedish, Belarusian, Latvian, and Russian before 2013. And I'll explain you later why this matters. I teach mainly, I teach creative writing and storytelling, but I'm also the inspiration researcher. So I also do teach inspiration. Yes, you can teach that and you can learn that as well. In 2018, I was happily selected to participate at Iowa Writers Workshop as an international fellow, and so I joined the international writing program. And basically, this is how we guys met, how I was 3 years later invited to record this video for you. And this is also my brief answer to the question you might have, like, who the hell are you? I gonna start today by reading my story, which is my only possibility to make you a bit familiar with my writing. And the story is a part of short story collection My Grandfather Used to Dance Better Than Anybody Else. And the story was translated during the collaborative workshop of Iowa Translators Workshop and the International Writing Program, the Ruby. The Ruby is translated by Anthony Zilli, and during the translation classes of professors Natasha Durovicheva and Aaron Ach. And it's gonna be read by the author, most likely with a huge amount of pronunciation mistakes. The Ruby, written by Kateryna Babkina, translated by Anthony Zilli. At the time, they all had a lot of jewelry, Valentina used to say. It was just Vovka who only had that one ruby. Lesa didn't want to think about where they had gotten everything they victoriously brought back from the war, but that was obvious actually, there was no need to think. Unlike the other jewels, Vovka's ruby had its origin in a sad story, a story that was romantic and even tragic, considering Vovka's fortune. Somewhere near Berlin, which Vovka liberated as a soldier of a Soviet army, he fell in love with Germany, and that love was short but faithful for what else can love be? Germany's name was Lily. Did she know the song about Lily Marlene, and did she wait for Vovka under the lantern? The story does not tell us, but Vovka talked about this a lot. As Valentina mentioned, or maybe he always just talked a lot. Well, the brief version of the events which Lesa inherited alongside the ruby after 2 generations was that something awful had happened to Vovka's Germany and that Vovka failed or was not able to save her. Germany was almost in Vovka's hands as she died, and she left him the ruby, the golden ring with the red gem, the only thing that she was able to keep for herself during the war. It was after they marched back to Zhytomyr from the front line that Vovka met Valentina. Valentina's medical camp had already made it back from the front after accompanying the army to the Carpathians. Before Vovka had even made his way back from Berlin, Valentina had practically found her place in the peaceful yet disordered world, working as a surgical nurse at the hospital. Somehow, Vovka emerged totally unwounded, though only physically, as it would become later known. And as such, he met Valentina not in the hospital but on the dance floor. Afterwards, he would visit her at the hospital anyway. For the entire year, he would come to the newly planted hospital garden during her night shifts and talk and talk and talk. If she'd had a choice, she would preferred someone else, someone less unwounded and with different priorities, but since it was a time of no choices, she spent all her nights talking to Vovka. After that year, he finally proposed to Valentina, and it was then that he also finally gave her the ruby, the only precious thing he had. Valentina was somewhat relieved. Other soldiers had been given away their necklaces and earrings and rings left and right. And at night they wanted more than just talking. Some of the girls, friends of hers, had already given birth. Some married, some not. But with Valentina, everyone understood that she was with Vovka, so men did not bother her with their jewels and their desires. Though there were more than enough women at that time. However, neither Vovka did bother her with his desires. Valentina did not wear the ruby for very long, maybe a week or 2. First, the ring was too big for her and later for Lesa's mother and later for Lesa. And second, though he was almost married to Valentina, Vovka still could not handle everything he saw, knew, or perhaps had done, and he then slashed his throat one night, and when he arrived dead at the hospital, Valentina was not even on shift. Lesa's grandfather, the young Soviet commander and husband of Valentina's younger sister Natasha, Lesa's grandmother, coined a proverb within the family based on this story. He was so eager to marry her that he choked himself to death. As a child, Lesa learned the proverb, though of course without learning the story behind it. It was said when someone was really planning to do something such as get water, buy milk, or vacuum all the carpets in the house, but wasn't able to for some reason or another. One could only guess what had driven Grandpa to first make light of such an unfunny story and second, to replace the bloody and dramatically slashed throat with the much more prosaic choking. Nevertheless, Valentina was annoying, and this was the source of the family proverb. So annoying that even her only suitor couldn't stand her and put himself to death. Until her late years, Valentina lived with her mother, Lesa's great-grandmother Kateryna. Lesa's mother and aunt would also come for the summers, along with plenty of their cousins, for Kateryna, after having Valentina, gave birth to many other children. Nobody loved Valentina, neither children nor adults. She was picky and touchy, always interfering in every situation, and it seemed to her that everyone wanted to humiliate and degrade her, so she would remain on the attack, since that was the only defense that she knew. Once, when all of the children were visiting the house, Valentina got into an argument with her mother and then decided to hang herself in the garden. And since the great-grandmother was nowhere to be found, it was the children who helped her out of the noose. The oldest among them were around 12 at the time. This lack of love for Valentina only grew stronger when the great-grandmother died, because then Valentina was left alone and she started almost 5 years voyage. One by one, she visited the homes of each of her younger sisters, overstaying her welcome from one spring to the next. But despite the lack of love, blood is still thicker than water, and everyone was able to understand how utterly alone Valentina was, and that she had no place to go. So they would not turn her away and instead gathered all the patience needed to tolerate her. It was before she went to the suburbs of Zhytomyr to die quietly in a house, swallowed up by cherry blossoms, that she gave the ruby to the youngest and for some reason favorite niece, Lesa's mother. But Lesa's mother disliked Valentina even more than the others. When Valentina visited, she would always take over her room, forcing the girl to share a room with her sister. And when Valentina visited for the last time, Lesa had already been born, and the baby was very scared because Valentina, this old, bony woman with an acerbic voice and cold hands, always wanted to hold her, leaving Lesa's mother split between upsetting either the old one or the little one. Lesa's mother, already having plenty of jewels, did not want to take the ruby, but then for some reason she recalled Valentina in the noose in the garden as she saw her in her childhood and took the present. She said thank you and hugged Valentina, hugged her frostily with no love. Naturally, Lesa did not take the ruby with her. Mom wanted to give it to her along with some chains and rings from Grandma's collections, from Mom's yachts. That was a time when wearing yellow gold was again in fashion, and Lesa would wear some together with white gold or silver. But she did not wear the rings. They were Soviet and cheap, though Mom thought that they too would one day come into fashion. Even though, according to her contract, Lesa was supposed to live for 5 years, her mother somehow felt or predicted that she was likely living forever. Therefore, Mom wanted her to have everything that had passed down the family and which was meant someday to belong to her, just in case. Lesa waited the ruby, this is what the family called the ring, in her palm. It was heavy and differed from all other Soviet jewelry in the color and brilliance of its gold, and it also bore a small factory stamp next to the carat inscription. But nevertheless, it was cheap. There have been many rings stamped like that for rich peasant women and not so rich city wives. The stone was too transparent and too clear, which meant that it was artificial and not a real ruby at all. So Lesa hugged her mom tightly and with love, and she was missing her already, but she did not take the ring. And now, lying quietly in Lesa's hand luggage, in a mint-colored case, were all the meager Soviet chains, grandma's rings, and mother's earrings made of yellow gold, right alongside her fancy jewels. Yet the ruby, the very same ruby, she could swear, was winking at her from the finger of a rather plus-sized woman who was struggling to take the middle seat after she had guided a teenager with glasses and an iPad to the window seat. The sharp-faced lady with black hair smiled at anything. She was delighted by the safety belt and motion sickness bag, as well as the small earplugs, sleeping mask, and wet towel given to her by the flight attendant. The pillow and brand-stamped blanket aroused her true admiration. "Do you have a pillow? Do you have a blanket?" she would ask the teenager in English, but he'd only lift his eyebrow without responding. "You must not fly often?" asked Lesa when the plane took off, mostly to somehow justify the fact that she had been staring at the lady in general and at her ring in particular. "Oh no, I fly all the time," said the lady happily. "I love it. Jacob," here the teenager again moved his eyebrow, "often travels to piano competitions. He's my only child and I just cannot tear myself away from him. He was just at a competition in Odessa." And have you been to Germany as well?" Lesa found herself asking. "Oh no, I haven't been to Germany yet," said the lady, "but the part of me was there." "Like Jacob?" Lesa asked. "No, the ring," said the lady, giggling in a voice that was low but clear. "It's the ring you've been looking at the whole time, right? Oh, I can tell you its story. Remembering Lily, raped and murdered by Soviet soldiers, and Vovka's slit throat, and Valentina, whom no one ever loved, Lesa decided she'd rather not hear another one of the stories, but the lady had already started. Once upon a time, her grandfather's home was invaded in the middle of the night. Her grandfather, who was also named Jacob, owned a small textile factory in Pfalz, the teenager would correct. His son, Gershom, was 4 at the time, and he thought that witches and other fairy tales were the creatures attacking them. His mother, sisters, father, aunts were all captured and ripped from the house. The building was completely dark and everything was in shambles. Gershom also ran barefoot and straight out of bed into the street, and there he was captured too. He was snatched up by the old rag picker who lived next door. Gershom had always feared the rag picker and his old wrinkled wife, as if he had already known that one day they would snatch him up and eat him, which was exactly what he thought was happening that night. The rag picker silenced the boy with his massive hand, wrapped him up in his coat, oversized and foul-smelling, and dragged him into the shack. However, he must have decided to eat little Gershom later, for he and his wife put him in the cellar and left him there. Gershom screamed and cried for a long time, and then he fell asleep in the cold and darkness, all alone. When he awoke, he saw for the first and the last time a candle lit in the cellar. Crouching on the old clothes spread across the floor, the old rag picker's wife huddled against him in a hug. For some reason, she was crying. "Are you a witch?" Gershom asked. "I'm the witch," said the old ugly woman, wiping away her tears. "And I put a curse on you. As soon as you scream or cry or say or even whisper a word or make a single sound of any kind, you will die." And then the witch scrutinized him as if to determine whether he was scared enough. She must have decided that he wasn't, so she added, "And your mom as well. And your sisters. Everyone will die if you scream or cry or say anything at all." Gershom gave her a silent look, and then, for some reason, the witch hugged him again, took the candle, and left the cellar through the wooden stairs, which she lifted up behind her. Over the next 4 years, which felt like 100, Gershom silently waited for them to eat him. Nearly every day they would throw some food down into the cellar and lower down a bucket with the water. Some days the old rag picker would open up the cellar door and, giving the boy gestures to remind him that he would die if he broke his muteness, the man would leave the cover open for a time, and a pale light from the shack would seep down. It was very cold in the cellar, and they would now and then throw down some new rugs. When the rugs became wet, Gershom would put them in a bucket after he drank the water. And then they would disappear into the cellar opening and reappear after a while dry. Once, when it was unbelievably cold, the old rag picker's coat dropped down into the cellar. It still stank, but was soft and warm. Gershom did not really grow or change down there, but he at least stayed alive. And one day, the cellar cover opened, and instead of a rotten apple or the water bucket, stairs lowered down to the cellar. The old rag picker told the boy to come up. Unconfident, the little boy climbed the stairs, sure that now was the time when they would devour him, but the burly Livin old man only urged him in the direction of the door and said, "Go." And then he opened up the child's palm with his weak old hands and placed something in it, something cold, hard, and metal. "Trade this for food," said the old man, and then repeated, "Go, run." And so Gershom ran, without knowing where he was headed, passing his father's burnt house, going somewhere far away from the rag picker and the old witch. And then he was picked up by the women of the Red Cross, who asked his name and where he was running from and where to, and did not understand him, of course, but took him with them and gave him some warm soup. And only then did he dare to finally look at the small metal object being warmed up in his grimsy fist. He did not have to trade the ring for food. "Oh no," said the lady, who seemed very happy about that. "The rabbis find Daddy very fast, you know. They were looking for every single Jewish child at that time, and my granny," here Jacob lifted his eyebrow again. "Well, we call her Granny, but in fact she was some distant relative of Daddy's father living in America. She asked about the boy, and her family in the US took him and raised him. Later, of course, we did some research about the rag picker. His wife died of hunger in the war, and he was lost, disappeared in the whole mess after the Allied forces came. They never had children. We were told his surname was Tannenbaum. That means Christmas tree in German. Can you imagine how beautiful that is?" So the ring is expensive?" Lesa thought to ask. "Oh, no," chuckled the lady. "It's not expensive at all. I think it's the cheapest kind of jewel, the kind that poor people have." And then she added happily, "It's priceless, this ring. It's like the heart of Mr. Tannenbaum, like the heart of every single Tannenbaum of the world. And afterwards, I'm gonna get this ring," Jacob said unexpectedly in a broken voice. "And then my kids are gonna get it, and their kids." The lady blinked, her eyes shimmering with tears of happiness, and she tried to hug the teenager, but he must have had enough sentimentality for the next few years, and he openly used the iPad as a shield against his mother's hugs. Lesa nodded and lowered the back of her seat, her eyes half closed. The lady admired aloud at the catalogue of dishes on board and the many films provided for the flight, and all Lesa saw in the semi-darkness of the plane was how the red artificial ruby winked at her. And as she was almost asleep, she saw the ruby pulsating and gleaming and growing larger and larger, and hovering before her face as if to ask her to hold it, to grasp it tight, as if it were the heart of poor murdered Lily, as if it were the heart of silently suffering Wolfgang who had no one to tell what was hurting him so much, as if it were the heart of the unloved military nurse Valentina, scared of everything that she had witnessed and abused by the fact that she was the one who had to see and experience such things. And Lessa dreamed as she took this red, transparent heart, cast in artificial stone, cheap but more precious than everything those people had had, and held it tight and warmed it with her hands and embraced it and remembered, giving all those people a little bit of relief, even though they had long been gone, but they still, at least, felt a little bit of relief. So, this story takes us to the few subjects that are widely represented in contemporary Ukrainian literature and that I'd like to talk about. First of all, it's about a complicated family story. Past that contains a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, broken lives, lost hope, and things like that. We all here in Ukraine have mothers, and some of us also have fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers who had witnessed and participated some particular horrors of the 20th century, like, for instance, First and Second World War, then Soviet terror in between and after the Second World War, properties taken away, and the whole families, whole villages sent to Siberia, imprisoning and killing of politically active writers, painters, actors, scientists, directors, and others, like artificial starvation that took the life of millions of people, like the UN and UPA, which was the partisan formations, Ukrainian partisan formations that were trying to fight the Soviets, and generally that were boys and girls caught up and killed in the woods where they were trying to hide and to fight, or they were also tortured in basements by Soviet regular army and KGB. And you can read a lot about things like this in English in the Museum of Abandoned Secrets. That's the book by Oksana Zabuzhko. Or in A Short History of Tractors in Ukrainian by a Canadian author of Ukrainian origin called Maryna Lewytcka. Or in the book called Hardly Ever Otherwise by Maria Matthews. Then it's a story about the Jewish tragedy, about the Holocaust. We used to be a land with a huge number of Jewish settlements, of Jewish villages, the country where Jewish culture and Jewish daily life coexisted with others. It was super widely represented here, and so we were the country where a huge number of Jews were murdered during the Second World War, I guess more than anywhere else. And it's not like Germans came and killed all the Jews. Apparently, local people were also involved, and actually, from the both sides, those who helped to kill and those who helped to save, they were involved. And I think we are only starting by now to think and talk about this part of our history, but it is a very big and important part of it. So you can read a lot on this difficult history of Jews of Ukraine in the book called Maybe Esther by Katya Petrovskaya, who's apparently German prose writer, but born and grew up in Kiev and writing about Ukraine. Or in the book that was awarded the Encounter Literature Prize last year, the book by Vasyl Makhno called Eternal Calendar. And Vasyl Makhno is a Ukrainian famous writer and poet living in New York, but you know, this is something that can happen to writer like living in New York. And of course, this story also includes the slight touch of magic, of mystic, like this ring and this magical artifact connecting and building the bridge between the present and the past and different families and different family stories. And in our literature, we love that jumps and bridges, and we love this tiny hint of magic, and or it's the delusion, or it's the weird acid trip, or something really magical just mixed up into the daily life. You can read, you can try to love one of my favorite books, Taras Prochasko's, called Unsimple. You can read Moscoviada or 12 Rings by Yuri Andruchovich. You can check out Felix Austria by Sofia Andruchovich. Those are two different writers. And Wozzeck by Yuri Izdrek and Kult by Ljubko Dereš. So you're gonna have a little bit more knowledge of this mystical / magical element in contemporary Ukrainian literature. What else you guys are writing about there in Ukraine? You'd ask me probably if I was not recording this in front of my iPhone in my living room / kitchen. We do write, of course, a lot about war, but not the Second World War, but the one that we have right now with Russia, which 7 years ago invaded some of our territories at the east, and we still have the military conflict ongoing there, the war with Russia on the border. I'm not even mentioning the Crimea, which is taken, like, occupied by Russia already also for 7 years. And what does it mean? That means that we all have now somebody like ex-classmate or distant relative, or your school time boyfriend, or the son of the colleague of your mom who was killed at this war recently, like now. And so it influences us a lot, and so we talk about that and write about this a lot. And the ruby is a part of the novel in the short stories. Actually, this My Grandfather Used to Dance Better Than Anybody Else, which shows us the wide perspective of lives of 5 friends, like the perspective of lives of their families and their pasts and everything. And those friends, they meet at school, at the first school day when they are 7, but at the moment where the book begins and when they already like 26, 28, one of them is already dead, actually killed there at Donbass. This is something that influences us a lot day by day, and of course influences our literature as well. As years passed, this war disappeared from the screens of TV and from news, but it's still here, happening to us. And you can read a really cool and thrilling book, Internat by Sergei Zhadan, or Long Times by Volodymyr Rafeyenko, or in a very precise and honest poetry collection, which is called The Apricots of Donbass by Lyuba Yakimchuk. You can catch the sense of this present in here war, and also the sense of losing home, because Lyuba Yakimchuk is the poet who becomes from those areas like Donetsk and Luhansk, which is now like the war field. After all, we also write here about love and sex and loneliness and how difficult the life generally is, and generally, and in Ukraine in particular. And here I encourage you to read, to check out the poetry of Sergei Zhadan, which is also translated into English, the poetry of Yuri Andruchovich, the novel Tanger by Ivan Kozelenko, which is a novel on a gay life. By the way, another difficult subject for Ukraine. We are still quite homophobic here, I'm sorry to say. And some of my poems as well, and some of my stories you may find in Canyon Review or Washington Square Review, and the magazine called Of Assignment. And you can check out the Fieldwork on Ukrainian sex, the book by Oksana Zabuzhko, or something by Tanya Malarchuk that I also believe is translated into English, and something else I might remember later and also include in those lists I mentioned that I gonna pass to Mr. Norris. And I know we're gonna have this Q&A with you after you see this. So I apologize for my English. However, I hope I have said everything I was intended to say, and I have also a few nice stories to share in more easy manner, like the story behind writing this Ruby story, or how the publisher paid me for the rights but canceled the book, canceled the contract later because they discovered that there was a story in the collection that tells about how two men had sex, and so they said we cannot publish this. And this is also about this book, My Grandfather Used to Dance Better Than Anyone Else. And I will also explain why I mention contemporary Ukrainian books, but took such a wide period, because all these books I have mentioned were written like in 30 years. And the answer is that I have very limited choice of something to offer you, because nobody translates from Ukrainian. So if you write in Ukrainian, your chances to become known and published somewhere abroad are close to zero. And also I will probably share some other desperate things. But now I'd love to end this video by saying that Ukrainian literature exists, and it is cool, and it is great, and it is very alive and rich and interesting and impressive. So I'm happy to be the part of it, of Ukrainian literature, and I'm gonna be even more happy if you check it out and read something from our writing. And that's it. Cheers and see you.